morning. So we are Upskill. We're the guys that make the software that goes on the hardware. Now, I'm not here to sell myself, if that's what I was told. So what I'm going to do is they did a really good job of sort of painting the scenario of where AR stands today, where it is in the industry. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it even more real. We're going to make it into a real bridge. So what I'm going to talk about are 3 specific use cases. And actually, I have 4. I just realized I have 4 specific cases that we're going to cover today. And so for each one of these, I'm going to talk about just painting the scenario of what they do today, right? What the challenge is, what they have to do day in, day out, and then how AR comes in and actually helps them. And what you'll see is that there are similarities between all of these, right? They all require these hands-free applications. And then you'll also see the similarities into how it can apply to your own companies and see where you're just walking around, you see your factory, you see John working on this piece of equipment, you say, hey, you know what? He doesn't have to go all the way back to the laptop every single time. And so let's just jump straight in. We'll go with the first slide. I don't know who I'm pointing to over here. I think it's over there. Jump into the first slide. So the first company, the first use case we'll talk about is GE Renewables. So GE Renewables, what they do, the specific use case, let's say we have this guy here, Tom, who's working on a wiring harness box. Now, much like our Boeing use case, which if you guys know who we are, Upskill, a lot of our use cases have to do with wiring harnesses. Now, what Tom does day in, day out is he takes a wire and he plugs it into one of 1,000 different holes. Now, you can imagine if you put it into the wrong hole, things go badly, and because these are going on the top of cell towers and wind turbines, it's not something you can fix easily, right? You have to send someone out there, and that's a whole other use case that we'll get into later. But it's complex assembly. It's something that people can't just memorize. It's something they have to look up. And in fact, the way he does it today is he's sitting there, he has his 3-ring binder on the right. He goes over, he looks at it, he says, all right, I have to take this wire, and I go over to the panel, I plug it in. So every single time, switching back and forth, right? And so the very first thing that AR does straight out of the box is it allows him to get the information right there. So he doesn't have to turn, right? He can just say, wire A168, it comes up, and then he plugs it straight in. So that already increases the efficiency. Now, the big thing about this challenge is the fact that, again, it's complex. Even experts can only memorize up to about 70% of this task, right? And even then, what they've memorized isn't perfect. They think they know it. In fact, that's the most dangerous part, is when you have experts who are like, oh yeah, I've done this for 30 years, I know exactly how it's done. Well, guess what? Either something changed, or maybe they just forgot. And here's what it allows you to do is it makes sure that you have the same compliance. You have people doing the same thing every single time. And so it not only increases efficiency, it also reduces the error rate. And so those are some of the numbers we have up is 34% increase in efficiency as well as the 25% reduction in error rate, which both sides save money, right? And so to control this thing, you can either use swipe, which means that you're using your hand, or as Sean mentioned, you can use voice. So instead of having to do lookup by using your hands, you could just say, as I mentioned, wire A168 comes up, and the information's right there. And so this is a wire harness use case, but obviously it can be applied to any complex assembly. Anytime you have to look up information, or you have to produce something that's a little bit different because you have a different option of different SKUs of whatever you're creating, if it's going to be different, it's not something that people can memorize. It's not take the screw. It's not just an assembly line going back and forward, right? Those use cases we don't touch because guess what? Those are streamlined. People know how to do them. And in fact, you have robots that can do them. That's fine. But when it comes to complex assembly, that's where it really shines. And so that's the first use case. That's the GE Renewables use case. So if we go on to, oh, that's nice. All right, so the next one is Allrig. And so with Allrig, they're a company, they do 2 things for these offshore oil rigs. They first inspect, so they'll go ahead and do a full inspection, make sure that all these oil rigs are up to compliance, that they follow safety procedures, and that everything is in check. Right, so that's the first thing they do. The second thing they do is if something isn't in compliance, if there are any issues that come up, they'll go ahead and fix them. Right, so they sort of like on, actually yesterday night I flew in, my parents had an issue with their computer. Guess what I just ran? I just ran my disk utils, verify and repair. right? And so that's exactly what they're doing. Verify, repair on the oil rig. So they'll verify and they'll repair anything that needs to be repaired. Now, as you can imagine, oil rigs are pretty far off the coast, right? You have to ship people off to them. It's a pretty far distance. And so, again, AR comes to the rescue. And so they use them for two separate things. First is for the internal subject matter experts. And so this means that instead of having to fly people out there every single time, they just have one person out there, and then they can call back to whatever expert. Let's say Jill is an expert on fixing a specific portion of the oil rig. Well, guess what? Instead of having to fly her out to one coast and then to the other coast the next day, she can be on the beach. It doesn't really matter where she is. As long as she has access and can do this see what I see video calling, she can help out on any oil rig. She can actually be in multiple places at the same time. So AR is a force multiplier. It makes your best workers everywhere, right? And that's sort of the benefit that we see in this particular use case. Now, along with that, of course, you have the compliance, right? Instead of carrying around this checkboard or a tablet, which could be hazardous, if you're on an oil rig, the last thing you want to do is be carrying around another object. And so it's all hands-free. And so instead of having to carry something around, you get that information without having to lug around this extra piece of equipment. And then the second way that they use it is, this is actually pretty interesting, they came up with this, is leaving behind a device to their customers. Right, so to these oil rigs, they basically say, you know what, we're going to leave, but we're going to leave a device here so that if anything goes wrong, if anything seems like it's going wrong, just give us a call. And then one of our subject matter experts will go ahead and connect with you guys. We'll tell you exactly, we'll take you step by step on what to do, and we'll help you through it. And that's the type of instantaneous approach that AR allows you to get, right? You don't have to wait until somebody comes out there to help you. You don't need to try and do it yourself. You can actually just get the expert help immediately. And so that's how Allrig is using it today. So talking about the third use case is GE Aviation. So this one is something that's near and dear to me because I like telling the story about IoT. And this is something that Will was talking about earlier, right? The IoT, the Industry 4.0, the digital factory of the future, all these buzzwords. The factory is getting smarter. You get all these things talking to each other, all these machines, all these tools. But guess what? The one person that that's being left behind is the worker. And so that's where, again, AR comes in. Right? So AR is the interface to all of these different tools, to these machines. And in fact, when something goes wrong in one of these future factories, guess what? The machines know about it the instant it happens. Or at least that's the goal. But guess what? The worker, the person who is going to be working with this machine doesn't know. Right? And so the goal is to get them embedded into the IoT, into the factory, so that they become one with the machines, which sounds kind of scary, I know. But that is the goal, to make sure that they're all up to date. And so for GE Aviation, their specific use case works with bee nuts. Now, if you're in aviation, you might know what bee nuts are, but I actually had to do a little bit of research myself. And if you Google bee nuts, you can do that right now. Actually, don't, put your phones away. So you can Google bee nuts, and this is what you get. The third hit, it talks about the dangers of bee nuts. And to this, I mean, up until today, you've probably never even thought of a bee nut. But it's one of the most integral pieces to an airplane. So for those of you who flew in, and for Sean, who took 5 airplanes to get here, the bee nut is one of the most important pieces of the aircraft. So what it is it's a nut that you have to tighten, you have to torque precisely. If it's not precisely torqued, if it's too loose or too tight, your airplane will fail, which it's amazing that airplanes don't fail more often, given how important this one component is. And so what GE Aviation uses AR for is torquing the bee nut perfectly. Right? It's a very small use case, but it's a very important one. And so what they did today, this is painting the picture of what they do today before AR. You have the engineer who goes over, they have their binder that tells them you have to torque this nut to 54 foot-pounds, right? You have to go over, that's exactly what you need to do. They say, okay, 54. They walk over, they climb up to the engine, which these engines are huge, of course, right? So they have to climb up. They go over, they take out their torque wrench, which their torque wrench, guess what, is Bluetooth enabled. So it has a little indicator that says, this is how much you've torqued it. And so they start to torque it until they realize, wait a second, was it 52 or 54? Well, they could either go back down and check, which would take more time, which means that they're going to be less efficient, or they could say, you know what, it was probably 52, right? And then they torque it, they get it to 52, and they call it a day. Or even worse, what happens is they're over there, they tighten it, so you can hand tighten it, and then you torque it. You can hand tighten it, say, okay, I have to go take care of something else. I have to go to the bathroom, or somebody called me over, I have to go help. And so they take a break. And then they come back, they don't know if they've torqued it or not, right? And then they forget. And that's how you end up with these airplanes that have loose B-nuts, which loose B-nuts, bad news. And so with AR, what they do is they go up to the engine, and on the glasses themselves, as they're torquing it, it's connected, right? And so as they're torquing it, it's also connected not just to the torque wrench, it's also connected to the back end. And that's the best part, because the back end, it knows that it should be 54, so you don't even need to care. All you need to do is keep torquing it until it turns green. And if it turns green, at that point, a few things happen. One, you as the user, you're connected, so you know that it's done, right? You know it's at 54, you know that the job's been done. It's no longer red, green means good. So that's the first thing. The second thing is it updates the back end. It says this B-nut in this procedure at this time was updated, right? So it has auditing automatically as part of the process. The back end gets that information in real time. It's not something they have to go back down, log it, and say, hey, I put it at 54, sign, check mark. It's already done. Just the mere fact that they've torqued it to green. The context is there, right? The machines know that it's been done. There's no reason why you have to create an extra step for the human to have to fill this in. And so instead, the back end gets updated. The human can go along their happy, merry way, say, hey, you know what, I torqued it to 54. And as part of the procedure, if you wanted to, we can also have it so that the user takes a photo, right? So as part of this workflow, as they're going through it, they say, step 1, torque it. Step 2, take a photo. And that way you have the complete process in the back end logged of what's been done, how it's been done, and the end result. And so all that information is there, which means that you have a huge reduction in error. It's much faster. Again, you no longer have to keep going up and down to that notebook. And so again, it's just an increase in efficiency, a reduction in error. And of course, you get the usual benefits of safety as well, since the less you have to go up and down ladders on an engine, you can imagine, means that you fall down less often as well. So for the last use case that we'll be covering, this is a manufacturer of medical devices. Specifically, this is the sterilization aspect. And so they sterilize about 35 million, or packaging and sterilization. They work on 35 million devices every single year. And if something goes wrong, well, that means that they either have to do a recall, which is really expensive, or it's medical. We're talking about people's lives, right? If something goes wrong, you can over-radiate a patient, people die, bad things happen. And this is a topic that we're talking about. In fact, Will and Sean have both talked about it. It's tribal knowledge, or as Will put it, I really like this term, brain drain, right? And so it's this concept that you have the aging workforce, and this is impacting everyone. In fact, for this particular company, they said in 2015, 27% of their workforce was eligible for retirement. That's a huge number, 27%. And by 2020, they're estimating 50%. That's half their workforce. And the thing about the workforce is it's not just people and their ability to do things. It's also their knowledge, right? These are people that have been at the company for decades. They know how everything is done. They know things that, guess what, not even the machines know, not even the back end, the MES, everything that is stored, that data, they know more than that. They know that, hey, guess what, to get this piece of equipment sterilized properly, you know, what I usually do is I like to put it on the right side of the machine because it works a little bit better that way. Or I like to orient it in this direction. It's not part of the instructions, but I've been doing it for 10, 20 years, and guess what? It works really well if you do it like that. And these are small things, and it adds up. At 50% of your workforce left today, the biggest challenge would be the fact that that knowledge is gone, right? And so what AR does is we come in, and we say, guess what? You can record all that information super easily. And so what we do is, in this particular use case, we have the users, the expert users that have been doing this for decades, we put it on their heads, and we have them record a video. So as they're performing the task, basically, it's the same task they've been performing. In fact, they're doing this on their job. They just hit a button that says record, or they just say record a video. And the glasses point out exactly what they're doing, and guess what? This video gets to be used for training for the next person. And the best part is this video will always be available. It's not something that you learn in training and then you say, okay, you know what, we're gonna leave it. Guess what? This workflow, the workflow can, for all future people, can include this video. And experts can skip it if they want, right? They just have to go on, they say, you know what, I already know how it's done, I have my own way of doing it. But if you're new to the job, you can say, let's say Amber, how did Amber do this, right? And so you can view the video, and as the person there said, the quote is, let me see if I have it right, you don't feel like you're by yourself, right? You feel like you have someone there working with you, somebody that's been doing this for decades, watching over you, watching over your shoulder, making sure you're doing it correctly, right there with you. And so the whole goal is, even as these experts retire, you're actually keeping them, right? You retain their knowledge, and you make sure that that knowledge transfer is smooth. And again, it's the force multiplier, right? It's about this, taking the idea that you have someone who's really good at their job and making everyone go up to that level. And so that's this particular use case. Now, of course, just to sort of, actually, let me just go on to the next slide here so you don't get distracted by that last slide. As an overall concept, there are three big things that AR does, right? And so the first is the applications for hands-free use cases. If it's a hands-free use case, or rather, if you need your hands to actually perform the task, whether it be fixing something, moving something, building something, AR already provides the benefits there, right? Instead of having to pull out your tablet or your 3-ring binder, you get all that information hands-free. The second is if you need access to information. And this is specifically information that is complex, so something that either changes or something that is going to be different every single time, changes. Or information that's external, so something coming off of an IoT tool, for example. Right? If you have this torque wrench, that data is going to be different every single time. If you need that information, guess what? The best way to get it is in a hands-free manner, and that's going to be on an AR device. And then the third idea is this idea of the expert. If you have someone that is an expert in the field, and you wish that you could have 1,000 of that person, or if you could have that person in 1,000 different locations at the same time, that's the other use case where AR can really help. And so between those two, that's what we do, right? So as our software, what it does is it works on their hardware, works on different AR devices to provide these two benefits. It does see what I see instructions, so you can connect into existing data, things that people have been you've been building up this database for decades, connect into that data, push it back to the user, get data from the user, push it into the back end. And then there's also see what I see, so the idea of video calling. So with that, I think I'm about done here, but again, this is a real technology that's being used today by these huge companies, right? And they're using it for efficiency, error reduction, as well as safety.